I was sitting at my kitchen table, drinking black coffee, when my front door swung open. My new son-in-law, Greg, walked in uninvited. Behind him stood a woman in a sharp navy suit, clutching a heavy leather briefcase. "She is a notary, Arthur," Greg said, flashing that practiced, polished smile. "She is just here to help us finalize some estate planning." Without waiting for an invitation, Greg pulled out the chair opposite me and slid a thick, intimidating folder across the wooden table. "It is just a family asset protection trust," he explained smoothly, his voice dripping with false concern. "We want to make sure you are properly taken care of as you get older." I looked down at the thick legal document. Then slowly raised my eyes to meet his gaze. I did not yell at him. I did not demand they leave my home. I did not even raise my voice. I just took a slow sip of coffee and smiled, a very cold, very quiet smile. He had absolutely no idea that I had known exactly what he was after for the last 3 long, agonizing months. And he definitely did not know about the secret voice recording app currently running in the background of my smartphone, capturing every single deceptive word he spoke out loud. To understand why I didn't throw them out of my house that morning, you need to know the secret I had been keeping since the day my daughter said, "I do." My father, Elias, was a man who built a commercial real estate empire from the dirt up, but he never knew how to build a relationship with his only son. We barely spoke for 20 years, communicating only through stiff holiday cards and the occasional obligatory phone call. He wanted me to take over his business. I chose to teach high school logistics instead. So, when I received the call that he had passed away suddenly at 84, I felt a strange, hollow numbness rather than grief. I expected nothing from his estate. I just wanted to pay my respects and go back to my quiet, ordinary life. The reading of the will happened 8 days later in a quiet, wooden office downtown. I sat across from his lawyer, a sharp man named Gerald, fully expecting to inherit perhaps an old watch or a few boxes of dusty tools. Instead, Gerald slid a thick folder across the desk and told me my father had left me his entire estate. The commercial properties, the investment accounts, the liquid assets. Once the taxes were settled, Gerald said the final number quietly, as if handing me a live wire. $8.5 million. The room went completely silent except for the steady ticking of a clock on the wall. I asked him to repeat it, my brain entirely refusing to process the magnitude of what I had just heard. I drove home in a daze, both hands gripping my steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned completely white. That night, sitting alone at my kitchen table, I made a very quiet decision that would shape everything to come. I was not going to tell a single living soul. Not my old friends, not my ex-wife, and especially not my daughter, Sarah, who was exactly 3 months away from her wedding day. I realized then that money changes the geometry of human relationships. It turns pure love into a cold transaction. I needed to see my future husband, Greg, clearly, without the blinding distortion of a massive dollar sign standing between us. I convinced myself that my silence was merely a temporary measure, a brief pause to let the shock wear off before I eventually shared the truth with my family. I thought I was just being cautious. I had absolutely no idea that my silence was about to save my daughter's life. Sarah had been dating Greg for almost 2 full years. He was 30 years old, worked in business development, a vague title that mostly meant he sold things to people without ever explaining exactly what it was, and possessed a polished charm that felt very thin after an hour. Even before my father passed, Greg's questions always circled back to money. Over beers on my porch, he would casually ask if I had a solid financial advisor or if I had ever considered consolidating my retirement accounts. I laughed it off then, but his eyes never quite matched his easy smile. He was always calculating, always watching. When they got engaged, the wedding planning became a financial pressure cooker. Greg insisted on an exclusive vineyard venue that cost more than most people make in a year. Sarah was stressed, doing math on napkins. I couldn't bear to see her struggle while I sat on a massive secret fortune. So, I quietly wired the money to the venue and caterers myself. I told Sarah it came from her grandfather's old life insurance policy. It was a half-truth, but it kept the peace. Greg, however, was intensely focused on how the payments were made, asking Sarah multiple times who was handling the deposits. The wedding day itself was beautiful, but the reception held a chilling moment. During the toasts, Greg stood up with his champagne glass. Instead of talking about love or partnership, he spoke entirely about building a secure financial future and making smart, unified decisions as a family. My stomach dropped. It was a bizarre, cold thing to say at a wedding. As he spoke, I noticed his mother, Diane, a sharp, calculating woman from out of state, staring directly at my face. She wasn't looking at the bride. She was checking my reaction, hunting for a tell, waiting to see if I would reveal the true depth of my wealth right then and there. I forced a polite smile, raised my glass, and joined the polite laughter of the happy crowd. I danced with my daughter, hugged her tight, and told her I loved her. Every single word was completely true, but the cold knot in my chest simply wouldn't loosen up. I clapped along with the rest of the smiling guests. But underneath the applause, I knew I had to find out exactly who I had just welcomed into my own family. I needed concrete proof, not just a father's bitter intuition. So, I called Marcus, an old friend who left teaching 20 years ago to become a licensed private investigator. I met him at a quiet, empty diner, laid out the timeline, the probing questions, and the sudden proposal. Marcus didn't look surprised at all. He just took my cash, closed his notebook, and told me to give him 2 weeks to dig deep into Greg's hidden past. 2 weeks later, we sat in his dimly lit office. He pulled up the public probate records for my father's estate. My father died in early March. The estate became public record in the first week of April. Greg proposed to Sarah in the third week of April. Marcus tapped the glowing screen. "Coincidences happen, Arthur," he said quietly. "But this isn't a coincidence. This is a deliberate, calculated schedule designed to extract wealth." Then Marcus dropped the real bombshell. He pulled up Greg's history from 3 years prior. Greg had been engaged to a 50-year-old widow who owned a chain of dental clinics. That engagement ended abruptly 8 months in. Why? Because the widow's assets were suddenly tied up in a massive tax litigation, and the immediate cash flow dried up. Greg lost interest almost overnight. There was no public drama, just a quiet, sudden breakup that left her completely devastated. It got much worse. Marcus also found employment records showing Greg was fired from a boutique financial firm 2 years ago. The official reason was overstepping professional boundaries with elderly, high-net-worth clients. He had tried to get an older client to add him as a joint signer on a business account, which was a clear violation of company policy. I took the thick manila folder home and sat alone in my garage under the single hanging bulb. I looked at the photos, the dates, the redacted termination letters. The puzzle pieces locked together with a sickening, metallic click. Greg wasn't just a greedy, ambitious young man. He was a calculated, serial financial predator who targeted vulnerable families with deep pockets. The coldness in my chest hardened into something unbreakable. I knew exactly what I had to do next to protect my daughter. I didn't confront him that night. I didn't warn Sarah. I just waited. Because a predator only reveals his true teeth when he thinks the trap is already sprung. Let's go back to that specific Saturday morning. Greg was sitting across from me at my kitchen table, the notary, Karen, waiting patiently at the end with her official stamp. The thick folder between us wasn't a family asset protection trust. I had already glanced at the dense legal jargon. It was a durable power of attorney, cleverly disguised, giving him absolute control over my finances and medical decisions. The moment I signed my name, I picked up my pen, hovered it over the signature line, and then looked directly into his eyes. "Greg," I said, my voice perfectly calm and steady. "Before I sign this, tell me about Patricia." His confident smile instantly vanished. The color drained from his face, leaving him pale and suddenly very small in the chair. "Who?" he stammered, his practiced smoothness completely evaporating. "I don't know what you are talking about, Patricia," I repeated, not raising my volume even a fraction. The 50-year-old widow you were engaged to 3 years ago. The one whose dental clinic assets got tied up in litigation, causing you to lose interest and abruptly end the engagement. I watched his throat bob as he swallowed hard. I continued, laying out the facts exactly like a teacher grading a failing test. I detailed the timeline of my father's death, the public probate filing in April, and his suspicious proposal 2 weeks later. I mentioned his termination for overstepping boundaries with elderly clients. I listed every probing question he had asked me on my porch about consolidating my accounts. Karen, the notary, sat completely frozen, her hand hovering over her stamp, clearly realizing she was an accessory to a massive fraud. Greg tried to recover, his voice rising. "Arthur, you are misunderstanding. This is just standard family planning." I didn't blink. I simply tapped my shirt pocket. "For the record, Greg, the notary you brought didn't even ask for my identification, which is a direct violation of state notary law. But more importantly, my smartphone has been recording this entire conversation for the last 20 minutes. Every single word you just tried to lie about is now permanently documented." The silence that followed was absolute and suffocating. Greg's mouth opened and closed. But no excuses came out. The trap had completely snapped shut. I closed the thick folder and slid it smoothly back across the wooden table toward him. "I am not signing anything today, or any day after it," I said, my tone final and unbreakable. "Now, get out of my house. And tell Sarah I need to speak with her. Alone." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The structural damage to his life was already calculated. I called Sarah that same afternoon and asked her to come over alone. When she arrived, I sat her down at the very same kitchen table where Greg had just sat. I didn't yell or accuse. I handed her Marcus's file, laid out the timeline, and pressed play on my phone. She listened to Greg's voice calmly explaining the power of attorney to the notary. Sarah didn't cry. She went completely, terrifyingly still. After a long minute, she quietly asked for the folder and the digital file. "I need to handle this myself," she said. She drove straight to their apartment. Greg tried to gaslight her, twisting my secrecy into a lie, but the recording shattered his defense. He couldn't explain the timeline or Patricia. When his mother, Diane, called to insist Sarah was overreacting, my daughter calmly told her to never contact her again. 3 weeks later, Sarah filed for an annulment. Greg didn't fight it. He knew the documented evidence would ruin him publicly, so he quietly packed his bags and disappeared. The predator had finally been cornered. A month later, the house was quiet. Sarah and I sat at the kitchen table on a peaceful Sunday morning. It was time for the final truth. I told her about the $8.5 million. I watched her face process the shock, then the hurt of my initial secrecy. I explained honestly that I was terrified money would distort her wedding, and I just needed to see Greg clearly. She nodded, understanding the heavy burden I had carried. Together, we went to a lawyer and set up a proper, transparent trust for her future, done entirely in the light of day. She looked at me and said, "You protected me before I even knew I was in danger. That is the greatest reward I could ever ask for." Staying quiet wasn't about hiding money. It was about giving the truth enough room to show itself naturally. If someone only loves you for what you can give them, let them go. Protect your peace, and never let a stranger's greed become your family's tragedy. My name is Arthur. And my daughter is finally safe. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to Heirloom Tales for more stories of quiet justice. What would you have done in my shoes? Tell me in the comments below. Stay safe, and I will see you in the next story. We laugh now, share meals, and talk about real things. The heavy, suffocating secret is gone, replaced by a beautiful, honest future. I appreciate your time and support. Please share this with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you very much.